Hello wrestling fans. Welcome back to the $20 million Pro Wrestle Machine studio and welcome back to the show. Let's dive in. Through the use of the Pro Wrestle Machine. December 8, 1997 Wrestling Observer Newsletter. Nwo Nitro plans that never panned out. ECW November to remember coverage. Big Daddy passes away. Frank Shamrock to UFC, and more. By Observer staff. The announcement of the Eric Bischoff vs. Larry Zbyszko match for Starrcade 97 in Washington, D.C. with Nitro at stake appears to be the beginning of Bischoff's biggest gamble to date, messing with the winning Monday Night formula. As mentioned previously, the working idea for 1998 is to split WCW and NWO into somewhat separate entities, each having their own television show and often running separate house shows. The groups would combine on the major arena house shows and the pay-per-view events, to make those shows have even more of a special aura. This could all change simply by changing the Bischoff-Zbyszko ending, as even though things are only a few weeks away, there is shockingly little completed as far as planning for the changes January brings. The grandiose idea behind all of this would be to make the WWF into the third biggest wrestling company in the United States. The risk involved in this move is tampering with what in 1997 has been overall an incredibly successful formula, making WCW incredibly profitable and resulting in its peak of popularity when it comes to Monday ratings. Although TBS wrestling ratings have never been lower in the history of wrestling on the station, house show attendance and the recent Havoc show drew more revenue than any WCW pay-per-view in history, a mark that will almost surely be broken again come Starrcade. Not to mention reopening the door for the WWF, a company that won't be diluting its own product by splitting up talent and trying to produce 2 live primetime shows per week, to regain control of the bulk of the Monday night audience, which seems to be the most important item from a psychological standpoint to both companies in the entire business. Without question, as we've seen everywhere, going too long with a pat hand in pro wrestling tends to create a stale environment, but wrestling fans, particularly from a television rating standpoint, put up with staleness for years before it starts to show in the numbers. Messing with a winning formula before it has shown economically to have started its decline is rare in any business, particularly this business. The plan as things stand at press time is for Bischoff to win the match, no doubt with oodles of outside interference from the NWO, and likely Scott Hall in particular, because they are obviously building toward a Zbyszko vs. Hall match. This would give the NWO control of Nitro, and move the WCW show to the new Thursday Night Live 8 p.m. to 10 p.m. slot on TBS. The planned announcing teams are Bischoff, Rick Rude and Mike Tenay on Nitro, and Tony Schiavone, Zbyszko and Bobby Heenan on the Thursday show, which will be moved to Wednesday once baseball season starts in April, which is as of yet unnamed, and for the most part not really very planned out either. The talent would largely be split between the two shows rather than having the same wrestlers headline both shows. Whether that means Tenay turns heel and is revealed as the WCW turncoat that gave Hogan and Bischoff the info every week as to when Sting wasn't going to be around for all their grandstand challenges. There had been talk internally for months about turning Tenay heel, or he'll be used to counterbalance Bischoff, and Rude is unknown. Although if it's the latter, he's probably not the right person for the job, since his forte is his ability to impart information while remaining non-confrontational at all times. The original idea of the show being called Thunder appears to have been dropped, as on checking the availability of the name, ESPN owned the Thunder name for television for a motor sports show. In theory, splitting the talent at the show should create more of an opportunity for the second-level talent such as the Chris Benoits, Eddie Guerreros, Marcus Bagwells and Rey Mysterio Jr.'s and such, many if not most of whom have been largely unhappy with the lack of upward mobility among those without the right friends, no matter how much their matches get over. There are even greater risks involved in this change than the risk Bischoff took when creating the Nitro show in 1995. At that time, WCW literally had nothing to lose when putting on a show opposite the WWF. WWF was considered the industry leader, and just being a competitive second would have been considered a success. As it was, WCW gained attention early by putting on pay-per-view marquee-level matches every week on television, like Hogan vs. Sting, Hogan vs. Luger, Flair vs. Savage, etc., and were dueling evenly for months with the WWF that concentrated on the old formula of a few squashes, a few competitive matches, and saving the marquee matches for where the company would make the most money. But the tables turned in the summer of 1996, when three things happened. Nitro expanded to 2 hours, going on 1 hour earlier than Raw and giving them a jump start. The NWO angle got off the ground with Kevin Nash and Scott Hall jumping and Hulk Hogan going heel, and the company started blowing away its competition inside the ring by signing so many smaller wrestlers who could do things the larger, more plodding wrestlers on the other show couldn't do, making WWF, in comparison, looked like slow-motion wrestling. Since that time, WCW has dominated every Monday with no end seemingly in sight. The game changes again in January. Will the WWF be moved a step lower down the totem pole? Or will it be the greatest Christmas present Vince McMahon ever received? The pressure is on Bischoff because if it doesn't work, he's given back the store and screwed up a proven winning formula. Even if it becomes obvious after a few weeks and they make the necessary changes back to the 1997 formula, it would have to be an admission of failure, and wrestling promoters are often very slow to make that admission. It's risky to be sure, since previous attempts to do all NWO programming have been nothing short of a disaster. The NWO segments in the empty arena on the Saturday night show were funny for a few weeks, but lived out their shelf life in less than 1 month. Attempts to take over Nitro for 30 to 45-minute segments have, without exception, all been disasters. Even if the 5-minute segment on November 24th, where Bischoff and Rude did the commentary during the Hogan Giant match, came off poorly, then the NWO pay-per-view show was not only among the worst pay-per-view shows of all time, but far more importantly, and something that has been forgotten by most, is that it died on the buy rate, and that's with a Hogan vs. Giant main event, which on paper should have done nearly twice as many buys as it did if it were advertised as a typical WCW event. And a huge advertising budget. It is known that behind the scenes Kevin Nash was trying to get the NWO show to be the Thursday show. From a risk standpoint, it's better for his and the NWO's position. Even if the new show were to bomb on Thursday, let's say, do about a 2.0 to 2.5 consistent rating, it can always be explained as being a new night for wrestling fans and the competition of going against blockbuster network programming in Seinfeld and Friends. With no wrestling track record to judge it against, anything can be said to be a success. More importantly, without competing wrestling programming, and also because even though Seinfeld and Friends are two of the hottest shows on television, when it comes to the demographic that watches WCW wrestling, Monday Night Football is far bigger competition. The actual potential for the ratings in the long run may be greater on Thursday than Monday, although not right away. Because TV viewership is based so much on people being creatures of habit, the Thursday show, like Nitro, is likely to build an audience rather than, like running consistent house shows in a market, do a blockbuster early and then subsequent crowds trickle downward. Of course, come January, the football competition becomes a moot point. On Monday, there is a track record to live up to. Anything below consistent numbers between 3.8 and 4.0, particularly with no football competition, is a decline, and that's a hell of a standard to have to live up to. By all rights, with no football competition, all things being equal, the ratings should increase from the current level in January by about 0.3 every week. Anything below what the WWF does, which would mean the show would have to go into an almost immediate freefall, which is an unlikely scenario, will be nothing short of outright disaster. Extreme Championship Wrestling's third pay-per-view show seemed to finalize a lot of answers to lingering questions. Can the company over the long haul make a go of it? At its level, yes. Can the company remain a pay-per-view entity? Again, at its level, yes, although there are potential monkey wrenches in the road they'll have to dodge. But if left to a free economy, probably yes, but at a certain level. Is the company a legitimate threat to WWF or WCW as far as being a major mainstream entity? Absolutely not. The November to Remember pay-per-view, billed ahead of time as ECW's showcase event of the year, fell far short of the mark in that regard. As a promotion, it was the most successful by far in company history. For a group that has only drawn 2,000 fans on 2 occasions in its nearly 5-year history, it destroyed all existing company records with a sellout crowd of 4,634, 4,218 paying about $103,900, plus another $43,930 in merchandise, which are phenomenal figures for a company of that size, at the Golden Dome in Monaca, Pennsylvania on November 30th. Of the 3 ECW pay-per-views to date, this would have to rank in the middle as far as a show. It was nowhere near the quality of the barely legal show in April. It was superior to the Hardcore Heaven in August, although that is more due to production improvements than a major improvement in the quality of the show itself. Based on the response here, the general feeling is that to its audience, ECW can do no wrong even when nearly everything goes wrong, as in August. To people who are fans of WWF or WCW and try to judge it by those standards, it naturally doesn't come close when it comes to production, but also the difference in wrestling quality for the most part is noticeable, even with a generally much higher level of effort and considering the somewhat inconsistent product of late by the WWF and WCW. But those people aren't for the most part interested in buying the show to begin with. It's a niche group buying, and a successful one, every bit like FMW in Japan, and in its own way like shoot groups in Japan as well, although as diametrically opposite from that as possible, although with not quite the same level of popularity. ECW throws in enough swerves and turns into every match for those into constant gratification to have something to hold on to, and has enough consistent hot spots during the match, although not done in a manner building a match, to satisfy people who buy the show for highlight reel spots or attend to chant ECW. The crowd reactions couldn't touch most WCW and WWF Monday night shows, but is still better than most of what qualifies as pro wrestling, and they did react to spots designed to get the big reactions, the suicidal spots, the low blows and the run-ins. Reports from those live said the crowd heat was never all that good throughout the show except for the Dreamer finish, but that the show was killed live by the Sabu Sandman match and dead for the last two matches. But that is missing the point as well. The human toll makes the injury rate in WWF or WCW, or for that matter in a demolition derby, seem tame. Some people would argue that what they do isn't even pro wrestling, because things like making it look somewhat plausible, not that any pro wrestling except shoot style looks the slightest bit plausible to begin with, and working without holes big enough to shoot dusty roads through doesn't exist here. But that would also be missing the entire point in looking at this business with blinders on. Pro wrestling is whatever enough people are willing to buy. What works economically is what pro wrestling is. Pro wrestling is not limited to what the WWF, WCW or even New Japan and All Japan are doing. ECW or FMW or IWA are all pro wrestling as long as they can survive economically. They cease to be pro wrestling when they can't survive, not when they stop working under standards set and associated with pro wrestling in times past or even times present elsewhere. On that account, ECW is a big success coming from nowhere and being a genuine player, albeit a secondary player, in the pay-per-view industry. No, they aren't New Japan, or even WWF. Nor are they Rings or Kingdom or for that matter Lucha Libre, nor are Rings and Kingdom anything like WCW. But they are all pro wrestling, just as country, top 40, rap and classical music are all under the umbrella as music. At the same time, missed and blown spots are missed and blown spots, and just because they're done by wrestlers who are over with the crowd and forgiven in an ECW ring as opposed to by wrestlers who are over with the mainstream in WCW, the fans don't groan because they are superstars doesn't make them any less blown in either setting. The injury toll for the show was huge, and probably contributed to a great deal of the show being an overall disappointment. Tommy Rogers injured his neck early in his match with Chris Condito. He's scheduled to undergo a myelogram, shooting a large needle in his spine this coming week. Tommy Dreamer injured his good ankle because he spent so long favoring the bad one early in his match with Rob Van Dam, and was practically immobile the entire match, although that didn't stop him from working a long match. He was hospitalized after the match, but was mobile by the next day and will still be working this weekend. Sandman injured his shoulder, then his arm, and banged up his ribs in acting like the sloppiest, most inebriated kamikaze pilot in a match with Sabu that was either a demolition derby classic or the single worst match of 1997, depending upon how you view pro wrestling. His injury list included both wrists being swollen, sore ribs and a badly bruised up side, and at press time it was recommended that he not wrestle this coming weekend, although his condition for the weekend was listed as iffy at press time. Shane Douglas, who was going to need elbow surgery to clear up bone chips to begin with before the match took place, in taking so many big bumps, made the injury even worse. He'll be undergoing an elbow operation this week, although that was actually planned before the match, and the spots in the match where Bigelow destroyed his arm were to be used as the storyline reason for the elbow injury. To the surprise of nobody, Douglas regained the ECW title from Bam Bam Bigelow in the main event of a match that went far too long, largely due to them giving Sabu vs. Sandman the hook after only 21 minutes. What was a surprise was the lack of crowd reaction for most of the match, particularly with Douglas challenging for the title in his hometown. The attempt to work a match similar to Ric Flair vs. Vader from Starrcade 93, the hometown babyface against the Monster, largely failed, even though it was the most professional-looking match of the show, as Bigelow's offense and demeanor and ability to get over as a monster was not at the Vader level of 93. And Douglas simply isn't over in his home city anywhere close to Flair in his. The surprises turned out to be the return of Stevie Richards, which was, despite attempts to hide it, figured to be an inevitability at some point, although maybe not this week, and appearances by WWF performers Brackus, Al Snow, Doug Furnace, and Phil LaFon, all in cameo roles. There were hints of a WWF vs. ECW feud, although it's not been made clear if that'll be the focus of the promotion. As it turned out, neither porn star Jenna Jameson or the Insane Clown Posse rap group appeared on the show as advertised. During the final week before the show, there were talks with WCW regarding Chris Benoit and also talks with Dan Severn. Depending on who you wish to believe, the Benoit situation went something like this. Either A, as a settlement offering and a proposed lawsuit by ECW against WCW that still has yet to be filed, WCW and ECW made an agreement that Benoit would work this pay-per-view. This fell through by the end of the week when Paul Heyman never called Eric Bischoff back to confirm details, or B, there had been negotiations on WCW providing talent to ECW in exchange for ECW dropping the proposed legal action, and that dates on both Benoit and Eddie Guerrero had been talked about, but that no settlement terms have been reached and that ECW was interested in Benoit and Guerrero for big market house shows but not looking at using Benoit on this pay-per-view show. In regards to Severn, Candido called Severn 2 nights before the show and offered an angle which would result in a confrontation with Taz after the Pitbull mask. Severn turned down the offer because it came as such a last-minute thing but left the lines of communication open, and ECW is still considering using Severn against Taz, although Paul Heyman recognizes how carefully everything would have to be put together in such an angle so as not to expose everything Taz has been built up as and at the same time get Severn, who has yet to do a job in a pro wrestling scenario since he first made his name in UFC, to agree to the scenario. Brackus, who was trained by Candido, was a last-minute decision to fill that hole. An appearance by Benoit would have been interesting politically since Furnace, LaFon, Snow and Brackus from WWF were on the show. There was a similar situation in Puerto Rico on Thanksgiving night where there was actually a singles match between a WCW wrestler, La Parka, although he was booked through Promo Azteca, which sent a crew of wrestlers to Puerto Rico for the weekend, and not WCW, against a WWF wrestler, Jesus Huracan Castillo, although there is a very good chance that neither the WWF nor WCW were aware of this taking place before the fact since it was in Puerto Rico, and both got their bookings independently of their U.S. offices. There was some concern expressed by WWF regarding the relationship between the groups, something to the effect that WWF gave ECW free television commercials for the pay-per-view that aired on its Weekend USA Network show and sends them talent free of charge. There is no problem when it comes to the storyline knocks at WWF and Vince McMahon on television or riling the ECW fans against WWF fans for a storyline in a promotional feud. Where the potential problems exist is the idea that inside the ECW dressing room, some of the wrestlers seem to be under the impression the worked feud is a shoot and that some of the wrestlers in ECW see and talk about the WWF as an enemy promotion when the WWF sees it as them doing many favors for ECW. From a political standpoint, there was a lot of blood on the show, most of it blading and some of it appeared to be Hardway, and Dam in particular. There were no camera close-ups of the blood, which caused some complaints from people who bought the show figuring it was guaranteed blood, but that caution needs to be there at this point in time due to the realities of maintaining a pay-per-view presence. If you don't get that by now, get your hand out of the sand and into reality. The spot where Sabu came off the top rope on Beulah could be a problem if it gets a bug under the wrong person's butt. The one surprise was Sabu pulling out a fork and hitting Sandman with it, since after the Eric Kulas incident, it was believed that one of the few stipulations Request made was no stabbing-like motions with blunt instruments to the head. 1. In what started out as a single match but turned into a tag match, Chris Candido, and Lance Storm, Lance Evers, beat Tommy Rogers, Thomas Couch, and Jerry Lynn in 1642. Rogers, 36, has been out of the mainstream for a while but was considered one of the best and most underrated workers in the business during the 80s as part of the Fantastics tag team that had a classic feud with the old Midnight Express in JCP. Apparently he injured his neck early in the match. Candido has gained so much mass that he looks like a freak out of a bodybuilding magazine and is becoming reminiscent of the Davey Boy Smith of a few years ago who gained far too much weight, albeit muscle, to the point it worked against what were some of his best attributes in the ring as far as speed and agility. The crowd was really hostile to both early until Candido took a groin shot to the post. Rogers suplexed Candido over the top rope, which elicited an ECW chant. Rogers also used a spinning Hurricane Rana. When Candido came off the top rope with a leg drop, announcer Joey Styles made an inside reference calling it a Spring Lake, Candido's hometown in New Jersey, Jam, as a spoof on WWF calling Brian Christopher's finisher at Tennessee Jam after the move was first called an Alabama Jam when Bobby Eaton did it in the 80s. Rogers got a near fall with a superplex off the top rope. Candido did a Frankensteiner off the top rope for a near fall. He then went for a flying Frankensteiner coming off the top, but Rogers dropped back and power-bombed him. At this point Storm did a run-in and nailed Rogers with a spin kick. The two double-teamed Rogers for too long. Apparently there was a mess-up backstage in regard to the timing, before Lynn made the save and ref John Finnegan saying he was turning it into a tag match. It got really sloppy at this point, although they were pulling one big move out after another, including Lynn doing a springboard twisting crossbody to the floor on Storm, and Condito and Rogers following it up with planches. At one point Condito's tights nearly came off as Rogers did a really sloppy rolling reverse cradle. They teased potential problems with Condito and Storm as at one point Storm went to suplex Lynn, but Condito shoved him away. Condito used his blonde bombshell powerbomb off the top rope on Lynn, but Rogers made the save. Rogers then hit his TIMECODES, a backslide dropped into almost a piledriver, kind of a reverse of the Japanese Goria special bomb, before Condito finally got the pin on Rogers with a Northern Lights suplex. Sloppy in spots, but a good opener. 2 3/4 stars. 2. Mikey Whipwreck on Watson, pinned just incredible, PJ Walker, in an upset in 7:15. It was Credible's first loss in ECW and looks to start a program between the two. The fans reacted to Credible as if he was still WWF jobber Aldo Montoya, including Aldo chants. The two worked really hard but didn't get any heat. Finish saw Whipwreck give Jason a low blow and then hit Credible, who was on the ropes, with a whippersnapper, a stone cold stunner off the ropes. 1 3/4 stars. Al Snow did an interview talking to a head that was dressed up to look like him. It was filled with nothing but insider spoofs on the Vince McMahon interview on Bret Hart, using terms like, "The head screwed the head," time-honored traditions of the business. "I gave you one free shot. I took one for the boys," etc. My feeling is it probably went over a lot of people's heads, even though ECW largely does appeal to an insider audience, but I thought it was hilarious. 3. Taz Peter Cernurka beat Pitbull number 2, Anthony Durante, in 129 to retain the ECW TV title. The crowd chanted "Jailbird" the Pitbulls. Paul Heyman came out to announce during this match, trying to sell the idea it would be a long, grueling match and thus a shock when it was so short. Aside from a Pitbull spin kick missing by a foot, it was a good short match. Taz did a belly-to-belly suplex and a T-bone before winning with the Kata choke. The crowd reacted to Taz bigger than almost anything on the show. After the match, Taz gave Gary Wolfe a suplex. Lance Wright then brought Brackus, wearing a WWF tank top, to the apron. Taz grabbed the house mic and said that Lance had brought his boyfriend who sticks needles up his ass and acted like Vince McMahon gave Lance a present. Heyman acted like announcer Vince McMahon, doing the mock disgust and acting like it wasn't supposed to happen. Taz then slapped, viciously cross-faced and choked out a security guard who was trying to break it up as Heyman acted like it was going to be a lawsuit and to get the cameras off. 1/2 of 1 star. They did a video feature on the Douglas/Bigelow angle, attempting to paint the picture that Rude got Bigelow to pull the double cross on Douglas and win the title under orders from McMahon, who they had a graphic saying hated Douglas. Then, with Rude out of the picture since he signed with WCW, Heyman stated that there have been published reports that Rude had been in secret negotiations with WCW for months, and Rude's absence was described on the graphic as because Eric Bischoff hates ECW. 4. Tracy Smothers and Little Guido, James Stone, retained the ECW tag titles in a four-way dance of death over the Dudleys, Mark LaMonica and Devin Hughes, Axel Rotten, Brian Knighton, and Balls Mahoney, John Reschner, and the Gangstonators, Jerome Young and George Caizzo, in 1432. Before the match, Tommy Rich, who was actually the best performer in the entire match, asked Devon if he wanted to shine his shoes. Joel Gertner then did his ring introductions, where were hilarious. At this point only the Dudleys and FBI were in the ring. Axel and Balls came out with chairs with their names on it and went to work. Big Dick Dudley choke slammed Rotten. It opened hot but fell apart about 2 minutes in. These guys pulled out lots of big moves, and both Bubba Ray Dudley and Mahoney have improved noticeably even since September's Terry Funk benefit show, but it was still slow setting up of big moves rather than any kind of a fluid performance. Bubba used a superplex on Mahoney. Devon did a headbutt off the top on him. At 3:15, the Gangsta's music played and New Jack and Cronus came out with all the weapons, bashing everyone in sight, and everyone in sight bled. It was hilarious at one point since New Jack went to blade but couldn't find his blade and was waiting for it on the floor, and it appeared Cronus noticed he couldn't find his and passed his to him. Big Dick missed a moonsault but about a mile, got right up and Jack hit him with a guitar. Cronus used the Firebird 450 flash on Big Dick, but the ref wouldn't count the pin since Dick wasn't in the match. Everyone wound up outside the ring and Bubba, 350 pounds, did a running dive a la Brazo de Plata onto all of them. Finally Jack hit Rich with a guitar, and Rich, after all the amateur blading, did his professional blading job, and came up with blood all over him immediately to make it at least look believable he got the big gash from the guitar. Cronus was on the top and Guido was supposed to hit him with the flagpole to knock him off the ropes, but actually Cronus was hit with that vicious cloth, fell off the ropes into Bubba's Bubba Cutter, tried typing that one a few times, for the pin in 10:04. Second fall saw Gertner throw powder at Mahoney, who ducked, and it went into Bubba's eyes. With Bubba blinded, he didn't see it was Devon that he was giving his Bubba Cutter to after Devon was set up by Rotten and Mahoney, and Rotten pinned Devon in 12:27. This left Axel and Balls vs. FBI. Rotten used a reverse implant on Guido. After Smothers took a bump from a move that missed by 3 feet, Mahoney delivered the Nutcracker Suite, basically a Michinoku Driver 2, on him. Hill ref Jeff Jones ran in for the count, stopped at 2, and kicks Balls in the balls, allowing Guido to score the pin. 1 1/2 star. 5. Tommy Dreamer, Tom Laughlin, went to a no decision with Rob Van Dam, Rob Sotkowski in 16:02 in an ECW banner vs. WWF banner match. In the ring introductions, Bill Alfonso was introduced as Senior Vice President, as a spoof on Eric Bischoff's title, on Extreme Affairs for the World Wrestling Federation. Dreamer could barely walk to the ring to begin with on one bad ankle, only made worse when the other one went out early in the match. This was similar to the Dreamer vs. Jerry Lawler match on the last pay-per-view in that they threw in tons of booking swerves. The difference is that Van Dam can do much more in the ring than Lawler can, but Lawler knows how to build a match in a way Van Dam can't. Van Dam delivered all kids of acrobatic moves and looked really good in doing so. All the typical crotch shots. At one point Van Dam springboarded on the guard rail to another point on the guard rail and ended up kicking a chair, held by Alfonso, into Dreamer's face. Van Dam had his eye busted open and it appeared to be hard way given where the blood was coming from. Van Dam used a leg drop off the top for a near fall. Dreamer did a neckbreaker off the ropes for a near fall. Dreamer dropkicked a chair in Van Dam's face. As Dreamer was on the top rope, Alfonso hit him in the bad heel with a crutch for a great heat spot. Van Dam used a somersault splash for a near fall and a split-legged moonsault, but Dreamer blocked it with a chair. They started trading spots with chairs. As Dreamer had Van Dam pinned, heel ref Jeff Jones pulled Jim Molyneux out of the ring and decked Molyneux. Dreamer used a schoolboy and a third ref, Finnegan, ran in and went for the count, but Jones stopped him and decked him. Finnegan and Molyneux got up and Jones challenged both of them. Beulah then gave Jones a low blow and Finnegan and Molyneux gave Jones a double DDT. Alfonso then gave both Finnegan and Molyneux a low blow. Then Beulah gave Alfonso a low blow. Beulah, wearing a short, hot-looking silver short dress, then took over as ref, so when Dreamer got near falls, she dove down giving everyone panty shots. Her breast may have been exposed away from the camera because there was a chant of nice said at her when she got up from one of the near falls. One of the near falls saw Dreamer literally bounce Van Dam on his head delivering a pile driver. Dreamer delivered yet another DDT, but this time as he went for the pin, Doug Furness and Phil LaFon showed up. As he was distracted by them, Stevie Richards hit the ring to a big pop and gave Dreamer a superkick. Van Dam then came off the top with a chair on Dreamer and covered him as Furness, LaFon and Richards all simultaneously counted 3. Dreamer was put on a table and buried under a WWF banner. Sabu then did a run-in and climbed to the top, teasing as if he'd put Dreamer through the table. Beulah went to protect Dreamer. Sabu came off the top and decked her instead, and they continued to work on Dreamer for a while until Sandman's music played, at which point everyone but Sabu mysteriously left. Van Dam did nice moves. Dreamer tried but couldn't move well at all. It was totally overbooked and the stuff with the referees was bad. It had the best heat of the show and the ending angle was a great angle, although very similar to what has been done before. Then again, isn't every Nitro finish the same angle? The crowd was really hot at this point and the show was looking good. Until 6. Sabu, Terry Brunk, beat Sandman, James Fullington, in 2055 of a tables and ladders match. Probably never have two men pulled out so many stops and tried so hard and done so many impressive spots in such a horrible match. These two missed more spots badly than Reggie White did against Steve McMichael. They made the Hulk Hogan vs. Roddy Piper Age in the cage match look like a Flair Steamboat classic. A collection of spots using tables so pathetically and obviously gimmicked, they were bending with any pressure on them and the first one broke before the spot, and ladders, most of which missed. Sandman, who went into the match injured, screwed himself up doing somersaults through tables trying to pull the match out of the toilet. What made it the worst match of the year was that even after they had for the most part killed the crowd, as there was no heat except the chants whenever a table broke, He kept doing the same stunts over and over, and the match never ended. There were people who thought this was the best match on the show, as they probably went through 10 tables and tried so many daredevil spots in the process, and Sabu at least hit on every springboard spot. But the crowd was dead and the work was horrible. What they did between the tables and ladder spots was like watching Jim Duggan against Ahmed Johnson, probably more due to Sandman being so injured there was almost nothing he could do but destroy himself. At one point Sabu threw fire, but the crowd and camera were so distracted the effect of it was lost, and he missed anyway. Sandman was about to hit Alfonso when Sabu dropkicked him off the top. Sabu then delivered an Arabian facebuster with the ladder onto Sandman for the pin. Sandman was out in the ring for a long time and got a good polite reaction from the fans leaving, who did appreciate how hard he worked and how much he destroyed himself physically. -3.5 stars. 7. Shane Douglas, Troy Martin, pinned Bam Bam Bigelow, Scott Bigelow, in 25:02 to regain the ECW title. Fans chanted LT at Bigelow before the match, which kind of indicated that Bigelow's WrestleMania match from 1995 had more of an impact on the crowd than the world title match they were about to witness. Douglas got a real tepid reaction coming out, which had to shock everyone since it was expected he'd get the Hart in Calgary, Flair in Charlotte response. According to Heyman, the previous match was cut short because it was going nowhere, and the time was tacked onto this match. For the story they told, and given that Bigelow weighs 360 pounds, and that's going to limit one's stamina, the match simply went too long and was boring, even though Douglas took great punishment trying to get the match over. The crowd was totally dead for the first 18 minutes. Whether that was because all its air was taken out by the previous match, or because Douglas just wasn't that popular, or Bigelow wasn't aggressive enough on offense to tell the story, or a combination of all of the above, it is the real question. Bigelow had the advantage virtually the entire match. They were trying to tell a story where Douglas took such a beating that he was badly injured in the process, but was still gutsy enough to win at the end. Anyway, no doubt it will get over once it's explained on television. Bigelow threw down Ref Finnegan, who ended up taking more bumps than Hogan on a year's worth of PPVs. Douglas juiced. Candido and Storm came out on a signal from Francine, who was injured but still tried to work while on crutches. The gimmick was if they hit the ring it would be a DQ, forgetting of course that the entire card was nothing but outside interference with no threats of DQs, costing Douglas the title chance. As this was going on, Bigelow pressed Douglas and threw him over the top rope out of the ring onto the ring attendants. Storm's knee buckled as part of the team making the catch. Bigelow then threw down Finnegan one more time. Francine hit Bigelow with a crutch, but Bigelow didn't sell it, made a wild crutch baseball swing at Francine, and then spiked Douglas onto the crotch and hit Douglas with the crutch in the arm, which was the spot to create the worked aspect of the injury. Douglas delivered a belly-to-belly, but Bigelow kicked out. Bigelow set up a chair and table in the ring and teased a powerbomb spot through it, but Douglas reversed it and delivered a belly-to-belly through the chair and table for the pin. 1 3/4 stars. Shirley Crabtree, who to a generation in the United Kingdom was the most famous and popular wrestler alive as Big Daddy, passed away on December 2nd after what was believed to be a heart attack at the age of 60. Big Daddy, the big brother of England's longtime leading wrestling promoter, Max Crabtree, was largely a takeoff on the American Haystacks Calhoun the fat, jolly babyface with limited mobility and a crushing big splash. His matches consisted of him bouncing foes around with his enormous belly for laughs, some selling for eye rakes but no bumps, and the comeback ending with his famous big splash. Big Daddy was the biggest wrestling star when his brother's promotion aired every Saturday afternoon on network television to an audience of millions. During the 70s and through the mid-80s, the Saturday afternoon audience for pro wrestling on Great Britain's ITV network exceeded the combined audience in the far more populous United States for Raw and Nitro combined today in what is considered a pro wrestling hot period. And to say Daddy was their Hulk Hogan wouldn't be an overstatement, in more ways than one, although probably the more accurate American comparison would be to that of Dusty Rhodes. British wrestlers from the era to this day heavily criticize the Crabtrees, believing they killed a lucrative wrestling industry in England by continually pushing Daddy as the top star. Although he was the most popular wrestler even in his prime, he was never anything more than a comedy figure which most of the wrestlers that put him over disdained, because of both his lack of ability and because his push was due to his brother being the promoter. It got worse particularly after he could do virtually nothing in the ring during his 40s and 50s. As Daddy aged, the wrestling audience that tuned in to laugh as his belly bumps dwindled until it was finally taken off network television when ITV felt it was appealing to a declining and older demographic. That, combined with the negative publicity that surrounded the industry after the death of Malcolm Kojic Kirk, who suffered a fatal heart attack in a 1987 match as Daddy splashed on him for the pin, largely felled the Crabtree empire. Considering both Daddy and Kirk at the time were in their 50s and terribly overweight, it created a very negative image of wrestlers and pro wrestling in England. The loss in popularity of the localized version of wrestling, which, with no television, was left drawing crowds of a few hundred on good nights, left the live wrestling business in England almost dead. The country was wide open for the glitz and glamour of the youthful in comparison and muscleheads the WWF was presenting the late 80s. Largely built around the back of Davey Boy Smith and peaking at Wembley Stadium in 1992 for the SummerSlam show that drew in excess of 75,000 fans, the WWF took control of the country, and for the most part it was the American product, including WCW, that has been the popular brand of pro wrestling in England ever since. As irony would have it, Smith's first major match on British network television was at the age of 15, weighing all of 150 pounds, in 1978 working a tag team match with Big Daddy, beating McManus and Steve Logan. Crabtree had been hospitalized for about 5 weeks after suffering what was believed to have been a heart attack. He had ignored doctors' advice to retire from the ring and still wrestled, despite suffering a stroke a few years back and being 60 years old. He was reported as in life-threatening condition over the past week from what was believed in a second stroke. His death made all the news headlines in the United Kingdom. Crabtree's fan base went right to the top of British nobility, including Queen Elizabeth and Prince Charles, who regularly watched his television matches during his prime. Among the people who had sent him telegrams over the past week were Queen Elizabeth and Prime Minister Tony Blair. Crabtree, who weighed in excess of 340 pounds, was best known for matches against legendary heel Mick McManus and the even larger and less mobile Giant Haystacks, who worked as Loch Ness in WCW in 1996, who himself is fighting for his life against cancer. Frank Shamrock captured the spot against Kevin Jackson to create the UFC's first under 200-pound weight class champion on the December 21st pay-per-view from Yokohama, Japan. Shamrock won a match to determine Jackson's opponent in the main event of the Shudo Promotions Valley Tudo Open Japan 97 on beating the Shudo Promotions World Heavyweight Champion, Enson Inoue, before a crowd estimated at 5,000 fans on November 29th at Tokyo Bay NK Hall. Inoue's championship was not at stake as they were fighting under Valley Tudo rules instead of Shudo rules. It was actually Shamrock's first win ever in what would be classified as Valley Tudo or NHB rules after making his mark in several promotions that don't allow punching to the face. Shamrock debuted with Pankracen after just 14 months with the company, captured the King of Pancrase title in early 1996. After leaving that promotion in the wake of the financial dispute between Pancrase and Ken Shamrock, he competed this year in winning individual shoot matches under rings rules against Tsuyoshi Kosaka and beating Olympic Greco-Roman wrestler Dan Henderson under submission rules on the International Wrestling Forum pay-per-view show. Shamrock, who has the unique knack for generally having a great match whether he wins or loses due to his quickness at escapes and submission technique, will face the 1992 Olympic gold medalist freestyle wrestler who is still a world-class wrestler and has dominated everyone in his path this year in NHB. Shamrock 1-1. Whose only previous NHB match was a loss early in 1997 in Honolulu to John LeBay via decision after an exciting 30 minutes, of which Shamrock dominated the early portion but LeBay controlled the final portion en route to a split decision. LeBay was physically dominated and forced to submit to a headlock choke later in 1997 in a match against Jackson. So using the A beat B and B beat C method of predicting, Jackson, by that standard should go into this match as the favorite. What makes it intriguing is that Jackson, with his world-class wrestling ability and superior strength, as he'll cut weight to make 199 pounds whereas Shamrock has gone into his recent fights without having to cut weight at a 191-pound bodyweight, should be able to take down and physically dominate Shamrock early. But Jackson has never been in the ring with anyone even close to Shamrock's proficiency when it comes to submissions. Shamrock proved in the match with Henderson, albeit under different rules, although the quickness and nature of that bout made it appear the match would have been the same under NHB rules, making him submit to an ankle lock in less than 1 minute, that he can beat a world-class wrestler in his prime. And that's what Jackson is. Jackson captured the World Cup in 1997 along with going 3-0 in NHB competition. In the U.S. Freestyle Nationals at 187 pounds, Jackson lost to Leg Gutches in the third match after the first two bouts were split, after they were tied after an overtime and Gutches was given the decision. Gutches, who also beat Jackson in the finals of the 1996 Olympic trials, missed the World Cup due to an injury and Jackson took his place and captured first place, but then Gutches went to the World Championships in Russia and was the only American to win a title. The recent history of NHB has also shown that no fighter has ever fared well taking 2 fights against top-level competition over a short period of time, and Shamrock has just 3 weeks between matches, not to mention both matches being in Japan, adding that element to the break in training time from doing the Inoue fight. Reports from Japan indicate the Shamrock vs. Inoue match was an exciting, brutal match, with Shamrock winning in 7-17 of the second 8-minute-long round after a punch and knee to the chin which knocked Inoue silly, and his second hit the ring for a finish that was officially a disqualification but would have been considered a throwing in the towel TKO in most combat sports. Inoue, now 8-3, was ranked number 3 in the world in the under 200 weight class by Fighting Sports newsletter, behind only Murillo Bustamante of Brazil and Jackson. Inoue had the controlling position for most of the second round but was unable to do serious damage, and when Shamrock escaped, he managed to nail him standing with a combination attack that did the job. After the match, Shamrock said that he had suffered no serious injuries in the match and talked about preparing for the match with Jackson. Shamrock was seconded in the fight by UFC heavyweight champion Maurice Smith, who was also his second in the Henderson match. Shamrock has been Smith's second in all of his previous NHB matches and has been his ground fighting trainer for more than 2 years. This creates an interesting double at UFC, as both Shamrock and Smith will be in title matches on the same show, with Smith defending his heavyweight crown against Randy Couture, who should be by far Smith's toughest challenge to date. Win, lose, or draw, Shamrock, barring an injury, could be in Smith's corner, since that match would go on last. However, Smith may not be able to be in Shamrock's corner, since the match would take place anywhere from a few minutes to less than 1 hour before his title defense. In recent weeks, Shamrock has had a business split from the Lion's Den and his family and has moved to the San Jose area, where he plans on opening up his own dojo teaching submissions. Also at the Shudo show, the group's top star, Rumina Sato of Japan, ranked number 5 in the world in the under 165-pound weight division, upped his record to 11-0-1 by surprising John Lewis, 2-2-3, with an armlock at 1:23 of the second round. Lewis went into the match ranked number 4, largely because in a previous meeting between the two that went to a 24 minutes time limit draw, that Lewis dominated the fight and gave Sato a brutal beating in a match without judges' decisions. Tom Erickson, the top freestyle super heavyweight in the United States and ranked number 6 in the heavyweight division of NHB, upped his record to 6-0-1 with a 37 seconds knockout win over Ed de Graaf of Holland, a protege of Gerard Gordeau. It was Erickson's debut in Japan, and there were reports he got over big. There was a big controversy the day before the event when the promotion wouldn't allow Erickson to wear wrestling shoes, even though he promised not to kick with them. The Raw team claimed that the rule at the show banning wearing shoes showed no respect for wrestlers. In the match, Erickson, to show a form of protest over having to go barefooted, did throw one kick in the match for good measure. Erickson has looked like a killer in previous fights in Brazil, but has always come across as an overpowering but uncharismatic fighter, criticized for having no good finishing technique on US pay-per-view shows and winning a decision in a submissions-only match against Kosaka and going to a 40-minute draw and dominating the Mars tournament final with no judges' decisions against Bustamante, who he outweighed by 80 pounds. His lack of an exciting finishing move is a main reason why UFC has continually steered clear of him, although there are those, particularly amateur wrestlers, who think Erickson is potentially the most dominant fighter of all. Former pro wrestler UWFI and current shoot fighter and promoter of the popular USWF out of Amarillo, Texas, Steve Nelson, was upset by Yataro Nakao with a triangle choke submission in the second round of their match. With one night remaining in round-robin play, there are 4 teams still mathematically alive in the 21st annual All Japan Real World Tag League Tournament. However, going into the show on December 3rd in Niigata, barring an upset, which usually does happen into the final day of the tournament, it looks to be a rematch of last year's classic final with Toshiaki Kawada and Akira Taue, the 1996 winners, versus Mitsuharu Misawa and Jun Akiyama on December 5th at Budokan Hall. Kawada and Taue finished round-robin competition with a 7-1-1 record, clinching no worse than a tie for first place. Misawa and Akiyama went into their final match on December 3rd against Takao Mori and Tomohiro Honda with a 6-1-1 record and 13 points. The expected win would give them 15 points and tie them with Kawada and Taue for first place. A time limit draw, which would be a major upset, would necessitate some sort of a playoff match involving 2 or 3 teams with the winners facing Kawada and Taue, while an upset loss would eliminate them from the finals. All Japan traditionally goes into the final day of the round robin with several teams alive, but it always winds up with a singles match rather than needing a triangle type deal at the end. However, in the Champion Carnival singles tournament in April, they broke the formula and had Kawada, Misawa and Kenta Kobashi do a triangle on the last day, with Kawada going over. By traditional All Japan standards, one would expect Misawa and Akiyama to beat Kawada and Taue in the finals at Budokan, which by tradition is the company's biggest match and show of the year. Kawada and Taue beat them in the finals last year, and also in their round-robin match earlier in the tournament on November 28 in Taue, Kawada made Akiyama submit to the stretch plum. In addition, Kawada went over in the Champion Carnival tournament. The other two teams mathematically alive going into the last day are Steve Williams and Gary Albright, who finished the round-robin with a 6-1-2 record for 14 points, and Kenta Kobashi and Johnny Ace, who had a match remaining against Hayabusa and Jinsei Shinzaki on December 3rd, going into it with a 5-1-2 record for 12 points. A win by the Kobashi team coupled with a draw in the Misawa match would put all three teams, Kobashi's, Misawa's and Williams, tied with 14, although the more likely scenario would be the win by Misawa's team, and Kobashi and Williams teams both ending up in a tie for third. The remainder of tournament standings going into the December 3rd show were 5. Johnny Smith and Wolf Hotfield 3-2-2, 8 points. 6. Stan Hansen and Bobby Duncombe Jr. 3-6, 6 points. 7. Hayabusa and Shinzaki 2-6, 4 points. Honda and Amori 2-6, 4 points. And Giant Kimala 2 and Jun Izumida 2-6, 4 points and 10. Barry Windham and Justin Bradshaw 2-7, 4 points. Kimala and Izumida face Smith and Hotfield in the other remaining tournament match. Japanese television rundown. November 2nd, All Japan, 1. Baba and Hansen and Jumbo Tsuruta beat Fuchi and Honda and Kimala 2-12-57 when Hansen pinned Honda after a lariat. This was the special nostalgia match on the company's 25th anniversary card. Baba looks noticeably worse physically and is moving even slower than the last time he appeared on television. Pretty soon he'll be so slow he'll be going in reverse. It wasn't awful except when Baba was in, but it was never good. 2. Kawada beat Yoshihiro Takayama in 1822. Absolutely horrible to a degree that would have to be seen to be believed, as it was probably the worst major singles match of Kawada's career. This is something of an interpromotional match since Takayama is from Kingdom and he's always really bad, but was worse than usual here. Since Takayama is about 6'4" or so, All Japan uses him because they are with the Baba tradition, the large human being promotion, but that thinking is so totally outdated today and they use probably the worst guy in the Kingdom office simply because he's the only one with height. In the first few flurries, Takayama threw a bunch of kicks and palm blows, splitting Kawada's lip open. Kawada would roll out of the ring and stall. This lasted way too long. By the 9 minutes mark, Takayama was all blown up even though they still hadn't done anything. It was coma-inducing by the 15 minutes mark, almost all of which was spent with Takayama holding the advantage and not doing much of anything. Kawada finally made the comeback, which the crowd did pop big for, and pinned Takayama after 2 high kicks to the face. Dud. November 15th, New Japan. 1. Otani and Kanemoto and Takaiwa won a survival series of singles matches against Liger and Samurai and Kashin. It opened with Kashin beating Kanemoto in 11 minutes. Kanemoto had Kashin pinned once with a tiger suplex and another time with a moonsault, but both times arrogantly got off him before the pin. Later, when going for another tiger suplex, Kashin turned it into an armbreaker for the submission. Only the last 2:30 aired, but what aired looked great. Takaiwa then came in and went after Kashin, including one spot where he went for his Death Valley driver but Kashin turned it into an armlock. Takaiwa then came back with a Death Valley driver and a triple bomb for the pin in 55. It was great for what it was. Liger then wrestled Takaiwa, opening up with a Kopo kick and a plancha. Takaiwa then got several near falls using his Death Valley driver and triple bomb combination. Takaiwa tried another series of bombs, but Liger got out of the second one and turned it into a cradle at 5:06. Another great fall. Otani then hit the ring on Liger, but Liger got the edge with a powerbomb on the floor and a running Liger bomb before Otani got the pin in 3:36 with a springboard swan dive, pin kick. Finally, Samurai faced Otani, with Otani winning with a springboard drop kick to the back and a tiger suplex. This was a fantastic match from start to finish. 4.5 stars. 2. Muto and NWO Sting beat Hashimoto and Yamazaki in 21:10 when Muto pinned Hashimoto after a Frankensteiner. Muto had one of those nights where he was on and made the match. Hashimoto's weight and shape has always been deceptive in that he looks heavy, but moves relatively fast and doesn't blow up. However, He needs to drop weight because he's starting to move like a guy of his physique. At his age, his work rate at that body frame is going to go in either one or the other direction, and New Japan simply can't afford it to go south when he's positioned to be one of the top 3 in the company for years to come. 3.25 stars. 3. Sasaki retained the IWGP title beating Chono in 22-10. Chono did an excellent job here from a psychological and storytelling standpoint, as this was the first time Sasaki looked and came off as a believable world champion. Although Sasaki sold better than usual, it was mainly Chono's work that got Sasaki over. Chono worked on his lariat shoulder most of the early part. When Sasaki came back throwing the lariat, it didn't have its power. Chono then went after Sasaki's knees to set up the STF. When Sasaki tried the Northern Lights bomb, his knee went out and Chono hit a low blow, Yakuza kick and STF. Sasaki made the ropes and Chono continued with a piledriver, flying shoulder block off the ropes for near falls and got another STF in the middle. He had the move on for a long time and in an interesting spot. Chono released it claiming he heard Sasaki submit, but ref Masao Hattori claimed that he hadn't. At this point Sasaki was selling great, but started throwing lariats, selling his own arm with everyone, but Chono selling as if they had power. Finally after 3, he hit the Northern Lights bomb and got the pin. After the match, Muto, in respect for Sasaki's performance, threw him an NWO t-shirt. Sasaki wiped his sweat off with it and threw it into the crowd. 4 stars. November 16th, All Japan. 1. Misawa and Akiyama went to a 30-minute draw with Smith and Hockfield. The last 12 minutes aired on television. Match was slow as you'd expect since they were going so long, although the final few minutes were excellent. Match seemed to accomplish what it set out to do since the crowd gave all 4 a huge ovation at the end and were chanting for Smith. The fans and wrestlers all sold it as a moral victory for Smith's team just for lasting the time limit in a huge surprise. Smith, who is actually the best worker of all the foreign crew in this promotion nowadays, is getting over after years of being a nondescript undercard jobber, and when he tagged in for the last few minutes the crowd popped big for him as if sensing a big finish. Misawa gave him a tiger driver in the last 10 seconds but he kicked out of the pin for a final big pop. 3.25 stars. 2. Kawada and Taue beat Hansen and Duncombe Jr. in 10:30 when Taue pinned Duncombe after a dynamic Liger bomb. Okay. Duncombe's work has improved a lot over the past year to where he's a solid worker, although he still lacks in charisma and has nothing special to get over to an audience used to seeing great work. Hansen has naturally declined as he's 48 years old, but isn't an embarrassment. 1.5 star. November 22nd, New Japan. 1. Don Fry beat Yamazaki in 12:21. Fry was again managed by Brad Rheingans and played as much of a heel as you can while remaining in a shoot fight style. Yamazaki was really good here as this style of match in his element and he carried things. Fry mainly got heat for twice biting Yamazaki in the ear a la Tyson, and refusing to break his submissions on the ropes. It was a back and forth match before Fry got the choke on in the middle. 2.5 stars. 2. Scott Norton and Tenzan and Ohara beat Kojima and Nakanishi and Yasuda in 12:26 when Norton pinned Yasuda after a power bomb. It was okay early, but fell apart toward the finish. Nakanishi impressively got Norton up for the torture rack. Tenzan broke it up, but just as Norton was landing, Kojima, not seeing where he was, accidentally brushed into Norton's knee, which is where Norton's knee went out. Norton, with the knee injured, immediately called for the finish, which thus had no build. 1.25 stars. 3. Liger and Tiger King beat Takaiwa and Kanemoto in 14:18. The last half aired on television. Tiger did some nice stuff early but got tired and was out of his league in 1997 with the other 3. However, Kanemoto is at his peak right now and he and Liger carried it to a great match. Takaiwa hit his hot moves on Liger for near falls. Finally he went for a power bomb off the ropes, but Liger turned it into a Frankensteiner, then hit a palm blow and finished him off with a super fisherman buster. 3.75 stars. 4. Otani beat Pegasus, Chris Benoit, in 15:28 to retain the J Crown. Pegasus started off doing his power moves, and then the rest of the first half of the match was trading holds on the mat. Since both are great mat wrestlers, this was a good build. They picked up doing all their hot moves in a super technical display. Pegasus got several near falls, with his big move being a backward superplex while standing on the top rope. Later in the match when he tried the move again, Otani reversed in midair and crashed on him. Otani then got up and hit a springboard dropkick and a dragon suplex for the pin. An excellent match. Even if it had been in another setting and not in a big dome, it was not quite at the level of some of the classic matches their two have had in the past. 4.25 stars. Mexico. There are 2 new promotions trying to make a go of it in the Mexico City area. One group is called Lucha Libre Latino, LLL, headed by Juan Herrera, who has been a booker in the past for both EMLL and AAA. He's building the promotion around a trio called the New Fantastics, consisting of Kung Fu Jr., Kato Kung Lee Jr. and Blackman Jr., the original Fantastics in Mexico, who predated the tag team with the same name in the United States, with a trio of Kung Fu, Kato Kung Lee and I believe Blackman. And later Kendo, who did a martial arts gimmick of masked wrestlers who were supposed to be Japanese, although none were. Kung Fu was Mexican, Kato was from Panama and Kendo was Dominican. Also in the promotion are veteran heels El Signo and Babe Face. The other group is even more veteran-oriented, called Grupo Renovación 2000, headed by longtime Mexico City promoter Raul Reyes, a name that would be known by longtime fans of California wrestling for his runs in both Northern and Southern California in the early and mid-70s. Reyes uses the number 2000 because that's the approximate average age of his top stars, including Mil Mascaras, 59, Dos Caras, 46, Enrique Vera, 50, Zapatista, Shu El Guerrero and get this, Dorel Dixon, who is at least 63. That's the same Dory Dixon who formed a tag team with Boba Brazil in Madison Square Garden during the early days of the Kennedy administration and in the latter stages of his career formed a bodybuilders tag team with Earl Maynard in Los Angeles sometime before Nixon was impeached. AAA's big show of the past week was November 28th in Zacatecas, headlined by Perro Aguayo and Octagon and Vampiro Canadiense versus Pentagon and Cyborg and Killer plus Aguayo Jr. and La Parca Jr. and Blue Demon Jr. and Mascara Sagrada Jr. versus Espectro and Demonio Negro and Electroshock and Abismo Negro. AAA is still able to draw in some cities because they have 5 remaining babyfaces who are over: Perro, Octagon, Vampiro, Latin Lover and Heavy Metal, and when any 3 of them are put together it's a main event that can draw. The heel side is a disaster since the lead heels right now are Killer, Cibernetico, Sangre Chicana, Picudo, Cobarde Jr., and Fuerza Guerrera, the latter of which is the only decent worker in the bunch. Pena is now trying to promote women wrestlers more extensively, attempting to use a group of your inexperienced gymnast types as the female Cadetes de Espacio, Space Cadets. In addition, he's using another woman wrestler under the ring name Mascara Sagrada Jr.'s girlfriend, which must look pretty unwieldy on posters. Promo Azteca drew about 3,800 for its show on November 14th in Tijuana, while AAA came back on November 21st and drew about 2,500. At Arena Mexico, the main thrust continues to be the singles Copa Victoria, which is probably going to end on December 5th with a match between Blue Panther and Atlantis. On November 27th they had Atlantis vs. Mr. Niebla and Black Warrior vs. Apollo Dantes, with the winner of those 4, which was Atlantis, meeting Panther on December 5th. Main event on November 27th was Negro Casas and Felino and La Fiera vs. El Hijo del Santo and Panther and Scorpio Jr. Promo Azteca's TV taping of the week was November 27th in Neza with Super Parca and Hector Garza, who was bothered by a bad knee, and Torero and Salsero beating had Hunters and Black Magic and Silver King on top, plus a one-night tournament to crown the first WWO Tag Team Champions with Super Astro and Super Colo, Tarzan Boy and Zorro, who I believe ended up winning as they're in line for a major push, Dandy and El Texano and El Brazo and Brazos Cibernetico. Also Juventud Guerrera and Los Villanos 4 and 5 and Super Crazy vs. Pirata Morgan and Pantera del Ring and Ultimo Guerrero and Ultimo Rebelde in a battle of heel teams, and the Flying Circus with Super Muñeco and Mr. Aguila and Venom and Shiryu, the same wrestler from Michinoku Pro Wrestling, against Damien and Halloween and Mosco and Colt. That card sold out the 2,700-seat building for the first Azteca show in the arena. AAA had drawn very well in that building, but lost the lease to EMLL, which couldn't draw there and recent shows had been in the 200 range every Friday night. EMLL is now working with the Azteca Group, largely due to their mutual enemy in Antonio Pena, and allowed Azteca a date there, and when Azteca drew, is now looking at selling Azteca the lease to run there every Friday. Tarzan Boy recently won the Mr. Monterrey bodybuilding contest. Kato Kung Lee Sr. and Ninja de Fuego were both fired by Azteca. Kato punched another wrestler in a backstage fight, so that was a disciplinary action. Expect Azteca to give big pushes in 1998 to Oro Jr., Aguila, Venom, Super Crazy, Mosco, Tarzan Boy, and Zorro. All Japan. The most traditional group appears to be ready to break with tradition and roll the big dice as they announced plans for a show at the Tokyo Dome sometime this summer to commemorate the anniversary year of Nippon TV Network and the 60th birthday of Shohei Giant Baba. Baba had turned down suggestions of doing a dome show for years, at one point when All Japan was hot, feeling once doing a show at that level, it would remove the specialness from Budokan Hall as being the showcase for the promotion and make those shows secondary in comparison. In addition, they were having enough trouble trying to book interesting matchups for 7 Budokan shows per year without throwing in such a mega event. One would think they'll do a Mitsuharu Misawa versus Toshiaki Kawada singles match, rather than try the interpromotional route or go back to the idea of trying to rebuild the wrestling corpse of Nobuhiko Takada against Misawa. The next tour will be January 2nd to January 26th, with Fighting TV Samurai, the 24-hour martial arts and wrestling television station, broadcasting the January 3rd Korakuen Hall, January 23rd Korakuen Hall, and January 25th Yokohama Bunka Gym shows. With Baba's 60th birthday on January 23rd, he was asked how much longer would he continue to wrestle, and he said that he would never retire and would wrestle until the day he dies. In the tag tourney matches for this past week, November 27th in Sapporo before 4,050, it was Gary Albright and Steve Williams over Stan Hansen and Bobby Duncombe Jr. when Williams pinned Duncombe. Kawada and Akira Taue went to a 30-minute draw against Kenta Kobashi and Johnny Ace, and Misawa and Jun Akiyama beat Hayabusa and Jinsei Shinzaki when Akiyama pinned Hayabusa after a urinage in 21:34. November 28th in Sapporo before 3,950 had Johnny Smith and Wolf Hockfield over Tomo Honda and Takawa Mori, Ace, and Kobashi drew Williams and Albright over 30 minutes, and Kawada and Taue beat Misawa and Akiyama. December 1st in I-weight before 3,150 saw Williams and Albright over Shinzaki and Hayabusa in 16:11 when Albright pinned Shinzaki, Ace and Kobashi over Hansen and Duncombe, and Misawa and Akiyama beat Blackjacks. December 2nd in Fukushima drew 2,400 as Hayabusa and Shinzaki beat Hockfield and Smith when Hayabusa pinned Smith in 2018, and Kawada and Taue beat Blackjacks in 11 minutes when Taue pinned Bradshaw after a Nadawa. As far as crowds are concerned, this is the weakest tour in recent memory and maybe in history. They didn't even run big shows in Osaka and Nagoya, and the only major shows, the 2 nights in Sapporo, both only drew 60 to 65% of capacity in a building they had sold out 2 nights in a row in the past. November 16th TV show drew a 2.8 rating. New Japan Tag Team Tournament standings as of December 3rd. 1. Keiji Muto and Masahiro Chono 4-1, Kensuke Sasaki and Kazuo Yamazaki 4-1, Shinya Hashimoto and Manabu Nakanishi 4-1. 4. Tatsumi Fujinami and Kengo Kimura 3-2. 5. NWO Sting and Hiroyoshi Tenzan 3-3. 6. High Voltage 2-4, Tao Yasuda and Satoshi Kojima 2-4. And 8. Tatsutoshi Goto and Michiyoshi Ohara 0-6. All the teams will wind up with 7 round-robin matches, with the 2 teams with the most wins going to the finals on December 8th in Osaka. Antonio Inoki returned from India with Katsuji Nagashima and talked about running a show with Dara Singh, probably the most famous wrestler in India during the 50s and 60s, who once drew more than 50,000 fans for a match with Luthez and is now a famous movie actor, at Gandhi Stadium, similar to the World Wrestling Peace Festival show he ran in Los Angeles in 1996. He again said he'd promote shows in India and China in 1998, and said that the WWF has good television in India but that the fans in that country would be more interested in a more serious style of wrestling. The January 4th Tokyo Dome IWGP Junior title match may be changed. Current plan is Shinjiro Otani versus Great Sasuke. As we've mentioned, there is the political problem involving WCW not wanting New Japan to do business with Sasuke because he's working with ECW. WCW is trying to get New Japan to change the match and send Ultimo Dragon over as the challenger, so we'll see how that turns out. Tournament matches this week were November 27th in Shiraishi before 1,700 saw Yasuda and Kojima over Ohara and Goto, and Hashimoto and Nakanishi over Fujinami and Kimura. November 28th in Shibata before 1,800 saw Tenzan and Sting over Goto and Ohara and Hashimoto and Nakanishi or High Voltage. November 29th in Ishikawa before 4,100 saw Fujinami and Kimura over Yasuda and Kojima, and Sasaki and Yamazaki beating IWGP Tag Champs Chono and Muto in a battle of the 2 unbeaten teams up to that point when Yamazaki made Chono submit to the Wakigatami Fujiwara armbar in 24-21. November 30th in Nagoya before 9,000 fans, 11,000 capacity, where the biggest show of the tournament saw Muto and Chono over Sting and Tenzan in 11:29 when Muto pinned Sting after the Frankensteiner, and Hashimoto and Nakanishi ended the unbeaten record of Sasaki and Yamazaki when Hashimoto pinned Yamazaki after a DDT. The main event in Nagoya was rare in that it was the junior heavyweights working on top as Jushin Liger and Kendo Kashin beat Shinjiro Otani and Koji Kanemoto when Kashin made Otani submit to the armbreaker, which was a high-profile win to set up Otani vs. Kashin for the IWGP Junior title on December 8 in Osaka, and December 1 in Mia saw Fujinami and Kimura beat High Voltage and Sasaki and Yamazaki beat Goto and Ohara. November 15 TV show did a 2.8 rating. Other Japan notes. Lots of promotions are trying to close out the year with a bang. Michinoku Pro is doing a tour all over Japan as opposed to just its northeastern Japan home base, using DOS cars and solar from Mexico. Gran Hamada promoted a show in Gunma, the city he grew up in, on November 30th, drawing a great crowd estimated at 3,700. Great Sasuke before the show begged the fans for their help because of his company's precarious financial condition. Apparently the group is behind on paying the boys and is looking at drawing some big crowds in the cities they usually don't run shows in to cover past expenses. Also at this show was Yoshihiro Tajiri of Big Japan. Tajiri said he wanted to work with Sasuke in 1998. Masato Yakashiji of Michinoku Pro is apparently going to work Big Japan while Michinoku is on hiatus as a regular opponent for Tajiri. Hamada and Gran Naniwa are expected to spend time working ECW during the hiatus. On December 1 in Osaka they drew 978 for a mixed tag with Super Delphin and Yone Jinjin teaming with JWP's Tomoko Kuzumi to beat Yakashiji and Sasuke and JWP's Hikari Fukuoka in 24:06 when Jinjin pinned Yakashiji. The women and men worked against each other in this match with the guys taking bumps for the women. Taka Michinoku returns for two shows on this tour, December 16th in Niigata teaming with Dick Togo and Men's Teo against Sasuke and Hamada and Tiger Mask, and December 18th at Korakuen Hall challenging Shoichi Funaki for the Independent World Junior Heavyweight title. The latter bout would have interesting political consequences if Taka beats Christopher because it would be the FMW's World Champion and the WWF's World Champion in the same weight divisions against one another. FMW will end the year with major shows on December 19th at Tokyo Komazawa Olympic Park Gym, December 20th at Osaka Rinkai Sports Center, December 21st at Nagoya Aichi Gym, 11,000 capacity, and December 22nd at Korakuen Hall working with ECW. FMW announced Tommy Dreamer, Sandman Taz, Bubba Ray Dudley and Beulah as appearing. According to Paul Heyman, Taz won't be going to FMW until January but that Terry Funk and Devon Dudley would be added to the above list, that he was trying to bring in Sabu as well but that deal hadn't been completed, that he would go there and that he didn't know Beulah was announced as going but thought it could be put together. Dreamer had been announced as going to IWA in December on a booking from Heyman, but that was since cancelled and IWA will instead use the Pit Bulls, although they were not booked through ECW but independently. The December 19th show will have Atsushi Onita, who as a heel now dresses up in a total Bret Hart ring costume, versus Masato Tanaka, Hayabusa vs. Gladiator, Jinsei Shinzaki vs. Yukihiro Kanemaru and Asia Kong vs. Shark Tsuchiya. December 21st in Nagoya will be headlined by an ECW vs. N 10-man tag so it'll be Dudley's, Dreamer, Sandman and Funk vs. 5 wrestlers from Zen. December 22nd at Korakuen Hall is scheduled to be a taping for the ECW television show similar to the ECW taping in the same building they did on the IWA show last year. The tournament final for Wars J1, Rikito's and Japanese heavyweight title belt, title tourney will be January 14th at Korakuen Hall. Ricardo Moraes and Sean Alvarez from Brazil will be doing what will probably be shoot matches on the December 23rd Rings show in Fukuoka. Complete Pancrase lineup on December 20th in Yokohama will be Takafumi Ito vs. Kusei Kubota, Kyuma Kunyoku vs. Kim Jong-wan, Asami Shibuya vs. debuting Igor Zinoviev, Guy Mesger. So strike him also off the list of possibles for the December 21st UFC pay-per-view show, versus Satoshi Hasegawa, Jason DeLucia vs. Ihuiza Minowa, Ryushi Yanagisawa vs. John LeBay, Boss Rutan vs. Keiichiro Yamamiya and Yuki Kondo vs. Masakatsu Funaki for the COP title. Big Japan is running a show on December 8th at Tokyo Oda Ward Gym with Great Pogo vs. Jason the Terrible, Roberto Rodriguez, in a casket match on top. That is being pushed as a rematch of the first ever casket match in Japan, a 1992 match between the two in the old IWA promotion. LLPW and JWP are running a joint show with AJW as well on December 5th at Korakuen Hall with Mayumi Ozaki and Tomoko Kuzumi and Shinobu Kondori versus Dynamite Kansai and Cutie Suzuki and Harley Saito, Norio Tadano versus Linus Asuka, Eagle Sawai versus Takako Inoue, Yasha Kurenai versus Carol Midori and Michiko Nagashima and Sori Okino versus Minami Toyota and Nani Takahashi. Here and there. Our condolences to Georgianne Macropolis of the Wrestling Chatterbox newsletter and the Observer hotline on the loss of her mother over the holidays. Music City Wrestling's Thanksgiving night show in Nashville drew an estimated 575 fans as Billy Travis headlined beating Doug Gilbert in a scaffold match due to interference from Flash Flanagan. Flanagan had earlier lost a ladder match to Wolfie D, while Terry Golden, who is said to be the best new wrestler in the promotion, won the North American title from Colorado Kid. Among the names who worked underneath were Sherry Martel, Adrian Street and 8-Ball of DOA. Tony Rumble's Century Wrestling Alliance ran a show on November 29th in Somerville, Massachusetts as a tribute to Killer Kowalski. Among the wrestlers who appeared to say nice words about Kowalski included his trainees such as the Pink Assassin, Mike Hollow, Antoine Roy and manager Johnny Rodeo, Jim Richards, Brian Walsh, Millennium and woman wrestler Violet Flame. There were also messages sent by wrestling writers Don Label and Tom Burke, wrestlers Perry Saturn and Hunter Hearst Helmsley, both trained by Kowalski, and by Abe Ford, who promoted pro wrestling at the Boston Gardens during the 60s and into the early 70s. Kowalski was also presented with a resolution from the Massachusetts State Senate. To climax the show, Rumble did a heel promo saying he was tired of everyone saying nice things about Kowalski and not about himself. Naturally, it ended with the 70-year-old Kowalski putting Rumble in the stomach claw. WCW ref Scott Dickinson is now booking CWA. Speaking of names from that generation, another name from that era, Dominic DeNucci, who should be around 63 years old, wrestled for the USCW on November 28th in Steubenville, Ohio, beating Nikolai Volkov. Sabu has been working Tuesday night dates of late for Mike Sample's Kentuckiana Wrestling at the Louisville Gardens, although the show this past week drew only about 200 fans. He was supposed to wrestle Flanagan on December 2nd. Latest weird gimmick at Incredibly Strange Wrestling is a wrestler known as the HIV Kid. His gimmick is that he does run-ins and clears the ring by obviously blading himself and chasing the heels off. USA Pro Wrestling on November 28th in Perth Amboy, New Jersey drew a sellout 1,250 for a card headlined by Tito Santana beating King Kong Bundy. Jim Kettner's East Coast Wrestling Association drew a sellout 600 on November 29th in Wilmington, Delaware for the culmination of a several-month-long angle where heel manager the Master, Rocco Mazza, had done a hostile takeover of the promotion. It wound up in a cage where Kettner and Cheetah Master beat Glenn Osborne and Master to regain control of the promotion. NHB. Bruce Beck got a job as the weekend anchor for WNBC in New York, which means due to scheduling conflicts that he'll probably no longer be doing the UFC broadcasts. Semaphore Entertainment Group wanted Ken Shamrock to do the announcing. They were more interested in him fighting, and went through the WWF, but that deal didn't get put together. At press time, the likely card is now Smith vs. Couture for the heavyweight title, Frank Shamrock vs. Jackson for the light heavyweight title, Vitor Belfort vs. TBA. The last name I heard them looking at for this slot was Hugo Duarte, a Brazilian ranked number 15 in the world with a 5-0 record, although when he was younger he lost a fight on the beach rather quickly to Rickson Gracie, a singles match mainly aimed for the Japanese market, perhaps involving Nobuhiko Takada, and a heavyweight tournament of which 3 of the participants would be Tank Abbott, Conan Silveira, and Yoji Anjo. Tito Ortiz, who went to the finals of a recent UFC under 200 division tourney losing to Guy Mesger, is now wrestling at 190 pounds for National Power Cal State Bakersfield. Ortiz won the California State Junior College Championship in both 1996 and 1997 while wrestling at Golden West JC in Huntington Beach, California, where he met Tank Abbott. ECW Washington Post TV columnist Tom Shawless, who is syndicated nationally, listed 32 things to be thankful for about the 1997 television season. Number 27 was ECW Wrestling, and it was only partially meant as tongue-in-cheek. Besides the pay-per-view, they ran a house show on November 28th in Trenton, New Jersey before a packed house of about 950 with Tommy Dreamer and Sandman over Rob Van Dam and Sabu on top. Pit Bulls may work the Buffalo weekend shows. Expect a Taz vs. Brackus match, but if / when it happens, expect it to be very brief. New Jack wanted to do a building dive on the pay-per-view, but it was vetoed. WCW. Tickets went on sale on November 28 for the January 5 Nitro at the Georgia Dome, selling 10,646 tickets the first day for $309,130. As of the close of business on December 1, that number had increased to 11,200 tickets sold, about 2,500 comps, since it's in Atlanta and all the Turner employees can get comps for them and their friends, with 5,000 cheap seats remaining as it's set up for a 19,000 seat capacity and may be expanded based on demand to as much as 23,000, but it can't go higher than that because it would destroy the camera angles. The largest gate ever in Atlanta would be the Flair-Nikita Koloff Starrcade match at $380,000, so that looks to be shattered, and the all-time attendance record would be in the 16,000 range for a sellout at the Omni, something that hasn't taken place probably since the 70s. Nitro on December 1 in Knoxville, Tennessee drew a sellout 5,782, 5,115, paying $92,914. They had 2 tryout matches before the show started, with local wrestlers Brett King facing Brian Taylor and James Iono, a Samoan wrestler out of Provo, Utah who is friends with Jimmy Snuka and had been around the Southern California indie scene for years before moving, facing bruiser Brian Cox, a Matt Osborne protege who headlines for Osborne's Portland Wrestling. No word on how either match went. It was the same old formula stuff, but the wrestling was better than average, so the show was as well. Bischoff came out for an interview and said he wouldn't wrestle Zbyszko unless Zbyszko put up Nitro in exchange. Rey Mysterio Jr. beat Juventud Guerrera in 540 with an incredible springboard Hurricane Rana. The match was going great until Mysterio Jr. seemed to blow out his left knee. He actually did a few amazing spots afterwards, but it took the wind out of the match even though Guerrero was right on the mark with everything and got some great near falls. After the show, Mysterio Jr. seemed to be walking around fine, so the injury wasn't thought to be serious. Hugh Morris beat Wrath in 249 with a moonsault when Mortis tried to kick Morris with a chain on his boot but kicked Wrath instead. Morris was pretty bad but Wrath looked good. Hogan did an interview with the Main Thing to get off the ground sales of the new Sting masks, and he challenged Sting once again to show up. Prince Iaukea upset Yuji Nagata with a crossbody off the top in 447. Prince has improved noticeably in it even though nobody cared. The work was pretty good in this match. You can see Kevin Sullivan regaining influence over the past few weeks with Morris, Prince, Jacqueline and Meng all getting renewed pushes. Harlem Heat beat Faces of Fear in 429 when Booker T pinned Barbarian with a Rana, but after the match Meng put Stevie Ray in the Tongan death grip. T then picked up one of those breakable chairs. Meng punched through it and put the death grip on T. Hall, and Nash did an interview with Nash making a hit with the Times 34-year-old reference to being the Jack Rubies and that the WCW wrestlers were the Lee Harvey Oswalds. Hall beat Disco Inferno with the Edge in 247. Gene Okerlund interviewed J.J. Dillon, who in his role as the excitable human patsy for Bischoff, agreed to put up Nitro so Zbyszko would get the match with Bischoff. Tenay and Shivani then began extolling the virtues on Zbyszko, who now that he's retired, has become a cross between Jack Briscoe and Hoist Gracie as the master submission expert. They talked about him being a wrestler at Penn State. Well, when he was in high school, he once went to a high school wrestling clinic there, and beating Bruno Sammartino at Shea Stadium, well, at least he was actually in that match. I'm surprised they didn't bring up how he tapped out Hoist and shot on Thez in a double cross if they were going to make things up like that. Ultimo Dragon beat Psicosis in 357 with the Dragon Sleeper. Crowd sees the Mexicans as jobbers, so even when they jump through hoops laced with fire, the crowd doesn't care. This was a good match, although it was ignored by everyone except the participants, including the announcers ignoring some hot near falls. Chris Benoit beat Kidman in 553 with the crossface. A great short match. It was even better than Dragon Psicosis or Ray Juventud. Benoit was just unreal and Kidman did well himself. Benoit then destroyed all of the nest after the match until he was distracted by Hammer and DDTs from behind by Raven. One good thing about a Benoit versus Raven feud is that there is little question Benoit is good enough to have good matches with Raven and that Raven will get enough interview time to get the program over. Lex Luger beat Marcus Bagwell via DQ in 729 when Vincent interfered. Lex racked Vincent, and then racked Bagwell after the match. Bagwell did something that only Flair has done in recent months: carry Luger to a decent match. They had a commercial for the WCW vs NWO video game and said that all of the wrestlers had 40 different moves. Geez, it would be more entertaining playing that game and seeing what Giant, Piper, Hogan, Nash, etc. can do with 40 moves than watching the real-life guys limited to 3 or 4. Finally, Diamond Dallas Page. Hey, did you know he got to rub elbows over the weekend with Muhammad Ali at an autograph signing in Atlanta? Beat Kurt Hennig via DQ. During the match, and this didn't show up on the camera, ref Randy Anderson got nailed in the head with a golf ball thrown by a fan. When will WWF and WCW wake up when it comes to encouraging fans to throw things at wrestlers? And he was staggered bad and was still hurting pretty bad the rest of the night. Finish saw Page use the cutter, but Rick Rude pulled Anderson out of the ring for the DQ. The entire NWO came in with Savage going Page with the US belt, and Hogan giving him 2 diamond cutters, and boy did they look bad, the second one on the title belt. Due to Thanksgiving weekend, no ratings are available at press time. Tickets go on sale for the January 31st house show at the Fleet Center in Boston on December 19th. It's going to be a loaded show with Hogan versus Sting in a cage match for the title, Giant and Luger and Page with Zbyszko in their corner versus Hall and Nash and Savage, with either Six or Bischoff in their corner, Hennig versus McMichael for the US title, Steiners versus Heat for the tag titles, Guerrero versus Benoit for the Cruiserweight title, Mysterio Jr. versus Malenko, and Bill Goldberg versus Buddy Lee Parker, plus Bret Hart will make his in-ring arena debut on that show. For whatever reason, Hart's name wasn't mentioned at all on Nitro this week. The plan seems to be for him to debut on television either on January 5th or January 8th. Alex Wright suffered a serious injury in the match with Aokia on the November 24th Nitro. Don't know all the details, but they thought he had some kind of a brain aneurysm and was blinded in one eye for a while and sent to the hospital and hooked up on IVs. WCW Saturday Night was taped November 25th in Toledo before 2,939, paying $53,653. The main angles were heel turns of Glacier and Nick Patrick. Glacier and Ernest Miller wrestled Harlem Heat, and as Miller was pinned, Glacier didn't even try to make the save. He then grabbed the house mic and said that's payback for being late, saying how Miller was late at the airport earlier. This already aired on November 28th. This set up a grudge match for the following show, which was a no contest when it never actually got started. Page beat Hennig via the same outside interference DQ in the US title match on the first tape. In the British feud, Chris Adams and Norman Smiley beat Steven Regal and David Taylor. Second taping main event was Hall versus Ray Traylor. Traylor pinned Hall using the Bubba Slam, and Patrick counted the fall but then saw Hall's foot on the ropes. Hennig then attacked Traylor in front of Patrick, who gave a fast count when Hall gave Traylor the edge, and then Patrick patted Hall on the back. Patrick continued at the arenas the rest of the week to do his heel turn, but on Nitro on December 1st, there wasn't even so much of a hint of a turn, and word was out that the entire turn angle was going to be scrapped. Hogan is trying to get Yokozuna into WCW. Remember, he still has a win he needs to get back. Problem is, with New York revoking his license, he wouldn't be able to wrestle in about 20 states. Bischoff reportedly told Sean Morley, who has had tryouts with both WWF and WCW in recent weeks, that whatever he's offered by WWF, that Bischoff would match or top it. House shows were November 29th in Augusta, Georgia, drawing $3,661 and $62,986, and November 30th in Johnson City, Tennessee, drawing $4,318 and $73,958. How's this for a switch in policy? Before, it was WWF announcing no shows and offering refunds, and WCW ignoring it. Not the tables have reversed. At both shows, WCW announced that Flair, who apparently really does have bone chips in his ankle from the leap off the top to the floor in the Hennig match, although the booking of that match ahead of time was scheduled to result in an injury. Anyway, he's out a few weeks, and Page, still bleeding urine from kidney problems although he worked Nitro, wouldn't be appearing, and refunds were offered. Usually, even when offered, only a few at most will get them, but in both cases, there were people, although less than 100 each night, that asked for refunds. The crowd heat was great at both shows, although reports were the shows weren't that good, particularly weak undercards. With Flair absent, Hennig worked with Benoit, and Benoit beat him clean by submission with the crossface to apparently win the US title. Patrick, in his short-term heel role, took the belt from Benoit after it had been awarded to him, saying that the name on the contract was Flair's and thus it was a non-title match. In the main event, Luger wrestled Hall. Luger racked Hall, but Patrick actually broke it up and pulled Hall off. Luger then racked Patrick, and when Hall jumped him, beat Hall to the punch and racked him, and Randy Anderson ran in and called for the submission finish. Brian Hildebrand, ref Mark Curtis, was backstage at Nitro. He's lost a lot of weight but otherwise didn't look bad in his battle with stomach cancer and was talking about being back on the road in January. The Giant appeared on the November 27th Jay Leno show in a cameo. He forgot to wear his cast on his broken hand. Besides Hogan vs. Sting and Bischoff vs. Zbyszko, nothing is official for Starrcade. It looks to be a six-man with Steiners and Trailer versus an NWO team trio of maybe Bagwell and Norton and Conan, probably Luger versus Savage and maybe Guerrero versus Malenko and Heat versus Faces of Fear, but nothing is definite. The sold-out pay-per-view will be billed as WCW and NWO together and air on a Saturday night at 8 p.m. Eastern. Hogan won't be appearing on the show. Bobby Heenan, Tampa, and Mike Tenay, Las Vegas, are expected to both be moving to Atlanta at the start of the year. Buddy Landel was backstage looking for work at the show in Knoxville. WWF. Some updates on the December 7th The Generation X pay-per-view from Springfield, Massachusetts. The card is now Shawn Michaels versus Ken Shamrock for the WWF title, Steve Austin versus Rocky Maivia for the IC title, Billy Gunn and Jesse Jam versus LOD for the tag titles, Sergeant Slaughter versus Hunter Hearst Helmsley, Brian Christopher versus Taka Michinoku to create the first light heavyweight champion, Undertaker versus Jeff Jarrett, which I have a feeling will either not take place due to Kane attacking Undertaker or be a short match with Jarrett winning due to Kane, and a 4-round boxing exhibition with Eric Butterbeanix versus Mark Marrow. The Vader versus Goldust match was cancelled since Goldust had surgery and had 3 pins put in his hand and won't be back in the ring until after Christmas. Kane versus Ahmed Johnson was cancelled when Johnson flipped his rental car 3 times going to the show in Hampton, Virginia, and he was banged up, and he also won't be back until after Christmas. Advance for the show as of December 2nd was $5,215, paying $92,900 with about 1,700 seats left remaining, so it'll be a sellout. Steve Austin got reports back from 2 neck specialists last week. Dr. Joseph Torg viewed a tape of his match from Madison Square Garden and how he protected himself working his new style and said as long as he didn't take any bumps on his neck he should be okay to wrestle with no significant risk of paralysis. However, a second doctor examined his neck and said that with the wrong bump that permanent paralysis was still a possibility. The second doctor's opinion kind of freaked Austin out, although he wrestled all week, usually being in the ring about 90 seconds total. For the most part, the injury suffered in the Owen Hart mishap has healed, but he's still got residual neck damage from a combination of his football days and his years in wrestling. LOD will be out of action with their last match being either December 8th or December 9th tapings, probably through the latter part of January or early February, which also explains their tag title loss. Crush was out of action this weekend due to jamming his neck in the angle with Kane on November 24th. In actuality, he's involved in a contract dispute. Don't know the particulars. Either they want to renegotiate his contract for less money, or his contract is coming due and they're offering him less money to stay. Either way, he isn't happy, and I'd say it's a solid bet he may be leaving for you know where, not that it's any kind of a major acquisition or anything. They're going to push chains now as the leader of the DOA. Absolutely nothing, at least at this point, to rumors that Sid will return in January when he's all healed up. Dan Severn had another negotiation session with Jim Ross. It appears WWF wants to go with Michaels versus Austin, Undertaker versus Kane, and Shamrock versus Severn at Mania. Severn doesn't want to come in to just be a guy to put Shamrock over, and they offered him a program besides the Shamrock program. Severn asked the WWF to put it all in writing, and that's where everything stands, but if he goes, the decision to go will probably be made within the next few weeks. Henry Godwin has been out of action after having nasal surgery and should be back in a few weeks. They began airing promos in England for the April 4th Mayhem in Manchester show. It was not announced that it would be an England-only pay-per-view show. That was the original plan, and it may happen, although the first pay-per-view was a disappointment both in terms of buy rate and in terms of getting it cleared in the pay-per-view homes. It'll be the first wrestling show at the 9X Arena, which holds 19,000, making it the largest indoor arena in Europe. Announced as appearing were Michaels, Austin, Undertaker, and Shamrock. Notable as far as not being announced was Bulldog, who originally was to face Michaels in the main event. Bulldog is scheduled to undergo knee surgery on December 4th. If the surgery is reconstructive, and they won't know how much damage is there until the knee is opened up, he could be out of action for 6 months or longer. If the injuries aren't as serious, the recuperation period would be shorter. Jim Ross was hinting on the WWF hotline that if the WWF were to sue Bret Hart, that they'd also blame him for Bulldog's knee surgery since it was breaking up a fight that Hart started. There has been no dialogue between the WWF and Owen Hart this past week, so everything remains the same. It wouldn't shock me for him to do a run-in at the pay-per-view, nor would it shock me for him not to be around for a while. Raw/Shotgun taping on November 25th in Roanoke, Virginia drew a sellout 6,542, paying $76,984. Show opened with Sean Morley getting another tryout match, losing to Jesus Castillo. The headhunters were there managed by Iron Sheik, but they put over Miguel Perez and Savio Vega. Hunters were said to have looked good doing a lot of top rope moves at their size, as they should have since they've been working with Perez for years. Mark Henry beat Sultan and Ken Shamrock beat Mark Kyle. TV opened with Gunn and Jam doing an interview running down LOD, who came out of the crowd and chased them off. They spent the show doing more of a Bret Hart tease, this time claiming that they had footage from the Survivor Series of McMahon and Bret isolated that would end the controversy. The footage they played didn't air until the last 10 minutes of the show, where they simply showed Bret looking at the ref and Hebner signaling for the bell, claiming Bret was looking and it was Hebner, not Vince, who signaled it, therefore Bret must have submitted. It was just a stupid ratings ploy, as they never even showed McMahon as this was happening. In the light heavyweight tourney, Michinoku beat Aguila in 4:19. Aguila is still too green at this style for the US, although in 2 years he may be the best flyer of them all. Aguila did a corkscrew moonsault plancha off the top rope to the floor. They interviewed Goldust and Luna. Goldust now has pink hair a la Rodman, wears a jock strap on the outside and a spiked bra on the outside. I always figured there were male members of the Runnels family who could have used a bra. They were doing a total sand bondage gimmick with he and Luna, including a close-up of them townging each other. If they do lose sponsors, I hope they don't go on TV and say the sponsors screwed the sponsors. A four corners match with Recon, Low Brown, Perez and Chains ended with Chains using his new finisher, the Death Valley Driver, on Perez when all the guys from the outside interfered for the DQ in 3:38. Chains was pushed as the leader of DOA and Crush wasn't there with them, saying he was injured by Kane. DX did an interview talking about the pay-per-view. Maivia beat Vader via count out in 5:09. Superheat as Austin drove into the arena in his Austin pickup, then got on the hood and drank a beer, or at least gave you the impression he was doing so. He was, although on TV they never actually showed him drinking. The crowd reaction to Austin as a face and Rocky as a heel was incredible. Goldust attacked Vader during the match and Vader ran to the back chasing him for a count-out loss. They never showed nor insinuated Austin was drinking while driving, but he did have a six-pack with beers noticeably missing. That drinking while driving and any attempts to glorify it is a very touchy subject. They did a great Shamrock video promo. Scott Taylor was to wrestle Christopher in the tournament semis, but Kane came out and killed Taylor. It didn't air on TV, but in the arena after Kane left, Christopher came out and covered Taylor for a pin. Ahmed came to the ring. His right leg looked to be a total mess. Jarrett said he wouldn't wrestle him doing the gimmick where the WWF isn't living up to its contracts, trying to establish that as the wrestler being the heel. Jarrett referred to Johnson, who legitimately couldn't work, which is one of the reasons they did the angle, as a water-retaining idiot, which is a steroid reference. Johnson called him a chicken shit, although it was somewhat bleeped. Slaughter came out and told Jarrett that on the pay-per-view he'd get to wrestle a major star because he was facing Undertaker. Gunn and Jam beat Bangers via DQ in 2:51 when LOD interfered and chased Gunn and Jam to the back, where they ran through the dressing room into the awaiting car, the Hebner family gimmick, and sped off. Bangers were mad at LOD as they were in no danger of losing when the interference caused them to lose via DQ. Cornette interviewed Mero and Sable. Actually, the heat was great here also. Mero ended up yelling at Sable and she tried unsuccessfully to cry before Mero told her to leave. At this point they ended the Raw taping and started taping Shotgun. With an LOD win, they couldn't tape that earlier because LOD was doing the first run-in wearing street clothes. They had Dude Love versus Mero with Mero DQ'd for the low blow, and when it was over, Sable left with Dude Love to start a program between the two. Christopher and Aguila beat Michinoku and Flanagan when Christopher pinned Taka, which makes Taka the favorite in the Springfield match. Dude did an interview and asked Sable to give him a big wet one. Mero came out to attack Dude, but Dude gave him the double-arm DDT and he and Sable left arm in arm. Helmsley then pinned Neidhart in 2:29 after Michaels hit him with a chair. After the bout, Helmsley gave him a pedigree on the chair and they spray-painted WCW on his back. He made a comeback, but Chyna handcuffed him to the ropes and they were beating on him until Slaughter made the save, putting the Cobra Clutch on Triple H, while Shamrock put Michaels down in the ankle lock and he was tapping as the show went off. The dark match main event was a triangle match with Dude and Austin winning over Farouk and Maivia and LOD. They did yet another of many steps to kill off the light heavyweight division before it started by having Flash Funk, the lowest ranked heavyweight jobber in the company, score a clean win over Michinoku, and replayed the finish on Raw with the description that moving up in weight class was too much for Michinoku. Sable will be a ring card girl on the December 6th Oscar de la Hoya boxing pay-per-view. Butterbean has a match on the undercard and they may shoot an angle with Mero to build up for the next night. Butterbean may not be a one-time only deal on WWF pay-per-view. Victor Quiñones is still trying to get Dr. Wagner Jr. and Shocker into WWF. WWF is hoping to do a major show in Japan in 1998, and they may work with All Japan, although no business deals are done between the two groups other than Blackjacks having worked the tag tourney. December 26th in Chicago at Rosemont Horizon has Michaels vs. Undertaker for WWF title, Austin and Dude Love vs. Farouk and Maivia, Vader vs. Kane, Shamrock vs. Helmsley, Goldust vs. Johnson, depending on each's condition by that time, Gunn and Jam defending against Blackjacks, Bangers vs. Godwin's whipping match, Mero vs. Flash Funk and DOA vs. Bariquas. The interrogator push is being put on the back burner. They were originally giving him the monster push for a program with Undertaker, but it appears that direction has changed. At least for the present, McMahon is taking himself completely off the announcing. Ross and Jim Cornette will do the first hour of Raw, and Ross and Jerry Lawler will do the second hour. McMahon has done this in the past 2 or 3 times, but in every case winds up back on the air within a few weeks. Business continued to be great at the house shows. November 28th in Cleveland drew 8,089 paying $154,898. November 29th in Boston at the Fleet Center drew 12,635 paying $215,597. November 30th in Niagara Falls drew 3,243 paying $59,552, and December 1st in Syracuse, New York drew 4,807 paying $81,977. Merchandise for the week was $238,000 or $6.74 per head. The Boston show was something of a rush job as they did 8 matches in 2 hours, since it was an afternoon show and they had to clean the building up for a Bruins game that evening, so the show had to end at around 3 p.m. in none of the arenas again this weekend did they acknowledge the absence of Bret, Owen, Bulldog, or for that matter Johnson and Crush. In Boston, they played Bret's music and it got a huge pop, although it wound up with Neidhart coming out. Neidhart worked as a face all weekend, doing a speech about being proud to be an American, just 3 weeks after being on Team Canada and leading USA chants against Sultan managed by Iron Sheik and winning a 110 quickie. Undertaker beat Michaels via DQ with Chyna and Triple H interfering in Boston. Taker chokeslammed all 3 after. In Cleveland, it was Taker over Triple H in the casket match, and after he stuffed Shawn, Triple H and Chyna in the casket. After it was over, DX started riling up the crowds with Michaels saying that he heard the fans in Cleveland had the worst aim. And you can imagine the reaction to that. A monsoon of objects in the ring with a fan at ringside getting nailed. In Syracuse, Michaels advertised as being in Triple H's corner but not wrestling, wasn't there. Austin worked in Boston in what was advertised as a 6-man street fight with LOD against Farouk and Rocky and Kama. Match went 6-10 with Austin working about 90 seconds, including using the stunner on Farouk for the pin, and another on D. Low for good measure. He also worked Cleveland, but not Syracuse. They didn't put WrestleMania tickets on sale at the Boston show, but instead gave everyone vouchers which they can mail in by January 9th to get the best available seats. I think the front row seats are given to ticket brokers, which is how the same people are always in the front row at WWF pay-per-view shows because they have the connections. Tickets are $300, $100, $65, $50, $35 and $20. They began advertising Royal Rumble for January 18th in San Jose with TV spots airing on Nitro and Raw in this area. No matches were announced besides the Rumble. Advance before the first TV spot aired was $7,400 and $236,000, so it's going to be a monster house as the building holds about 19,000 for wrestling. Stevie Richards had a meeting with Titan. Richards was at the ECW show saying that he was offered a spot in DX but turned it down. Those close to the situation confirm he was offered a great spot in the WWF, although didn't confirm it was in DX. And the latest updates on Bret Hart and the Double Cross. Hart will appear on the TSN show Off the Record on December 3rd, and do his Prodigy chat on December 7th. It was not true that Earl Hebner found out about the finish just as he was going through the curtain. Earl and Dave Hebner were both told by McMahon well ahead of time and told not to let anyone in on it. Hebner theoretically had plenty of time to warn Hart, although he obviously chose not to. Nobody in the WWF hierarchy knew that Hebner and Hart were good friends. Actually, I guess this proved they were right, although friends of Hart do corroborate that Hart believed Hebner to be one of his best friends in the company before this happened. Earl had all his gear packed in the car well before the match started, and Dave was in the car with the motor running in the parking lot for most of the match, readying for the getaway. The basic argument points within the WWF, and for that matter in a lot of the wrestling industry and among fans, in debating who was right, There has to be one side right and the other wrong because it's a simple black and white world we live in. Depends on who you believe in the most simplified form. Those who believe Hart had refused to drop the title believe McMahon was right, as I guess you have to accept Hart refusing to drop the title to justify McMahon's actions, and a lot of people for a lot of reason need to find some justification. Those close to McMahon insist Hart isn't telling the truth when he said he was willing to do a job later in the week. Hart, of course, insists he was. In that simplified question of the whole big deal, that all depends upon who one believes and who has more credibility, McMahon or Hart. There is documentation that indicates Hart is the one telling the truth. However, those defending McMahon say Hart changed his mind at the last minute and wouldn't do business, hence things turned out as they did. With Hart not around to defend himself in the WWF locker room, there are many of the boys who now believe he did refuse to put anyone over at any time, to the point when Michaels did the deal on November 24th with the Mini. He asked several of the wrestlers around in a group whether he should do the right thing for business and ignore Bret and build up the pay-per-view, or stick it to Bret, and the guys there told him he should stick it to Bret. The WWF claimed it was USA Today that made the mistake in the November 24th listings of a Bret Hart vs. Shawn Michaels match on Raw, and that their PR department simply wrote that Shawn Michaels would challenge Bret Hart, and that was the storyline theme of the show, but never indicated there would be a match. However, we've received several newspaper TV listings that weren't USA Today that also had listed for Raw in that time slot a Bret Hart vs. Shawn Michaels match. The other story is that, whether this is to save Patterson's credibility with the boys or whatever, is that Patterson really didn't know, and when he suggested the key spot to Hart, it was unknowingly relaying a message from McMahon, and that he felt McMahon set him up as well. Of course, Patterson and McMahon have both been around this business their entire lives and understand manipulation as well as anyone. Michaels, in an article in the November 23 Charleston Post-Courier, stated about Hart, "At one time Bret was a fantastic wrestler. But I've been in the ring with a lot of people. He ranks up there with exceptionally average. His brother Owen is 10 times the talent he is. The man's very different. He sees the wrestling business very differently. He really believes he's a hero in Canada. We all love the feeling you get when you have the adulation of the fans, but you have to learn to control that. This is the wrestling business. This isn't real life. My God. Get a grip. I've never had a problem with Bret Hart. He mostly had a problem with me. There's nothing I can really do about that. I'm just having fun and trying to be entertaining and controversial. Bret is from the old school, which is fine, but obviously it doesn't mix. He takes it much more seriously than I do. You should be able to have fun at your job. I don't take things that seriously. I didn't even have a problem when he attacked me in the dressing room. I just defended myself and that was it. I left. The situation got out of hand. At that time I needed to stay away my good old fake knee injury. Bret was harboring a lot of bitter feelings that were really his problems. He's the guy who has to work through them. Not us. The world should know this was not Bret Hart leaving, this was Vince McMahon asking him to leave. He simply didn't feel Bret was giving what he was getting. He was always late. He only did personal appearances in Canada when he felt like it. As WWF champion, I did everything. The Undertaker still does everything. Steve Austin does everything. There's a lot of legwork that comes with working in the WWF. Bret didn't want to do any of it. It wasn't convenient for him. He wanted, but he wasn't willing to give. The Reader's Pages. Double Cross. I'd like to start by saying I'm a Bret Hart fan and that he has earned the respect of myself and every other wrestling fan countless times over. Having said that, I largely disagree with the stance he took during his final days in the WWF. Simply put, he should have just done the job. His rationalizations for not doing so and his pickiness over the wheres and whens of losing the title only lends credence to Shawn Michaels' tagging of him as a mark man. I laughed at Bret's idea to hand McMahon the title on the November 10th Raw. Let's see, Bret had single-handedly determined that the WWF title will be forfeited, not lost, because everyone knew he was leaving. He'd fit right in with the Wolfpack, the other masters of the why we shouldn't do a job excuses. It stuns me that some fans are buying Rick Rude's story that Shawn Michaels isn't the real champion because of the finish at Survivor Series. Would Michaels be more of a real champion if he had won the belt in a more traditional predetermined finish where his opponent went along with the promoter's planned finish? And why is Bret Hart said to have been screwed? Because the ref called for the bell and ended a match that he didn't want to lose? This is what constitutes an unsafe working environment as claimed by some of the wrestlers? Has the world gone completely crazy? I think the WWF wrestlers are misguided when they reacted so angrily to the double cross. Like it or not, Vince McMahon was right to be concerned over the integrity of his championship. But does he have the right to violate a legal contract? McMahon's ethics truly come into question when we learn that he had planned to deliberately miss payments and breach a legal contractual agreement with Hart. McMahon was attempting to escape a contract that he voluntarily entered into 1 year earlier before this entire Survivor Series mess came to a head. That's what everyone's eyebrows should be raised about. John McAdam. Dracut, Massachusetts. Your in-depth examination of the Bret Hart double cross was the finest piece of sports journalism I've read in a long time. Like many of your readers, my first thought after seeing the finish was, I can't wait to read The Observer next week to see if what I think just happened really happened. I work as a sports writer and encouraged several coworkers, who are not wrestling fans, to read your coverage. They are equally impressed with the thoroughness of the story and the meticulous research that you obviously did. Not only is The Observer the sole historical reference point for the entire industry, it is the single most noble sports or entertainment publication in the world. I just wish more mainstream journalists would take the time to appreciate the work you do so you could get the credit you truly deserve. Brian Dulick. Brunswick, Ohio. Great job on the story. You stuck to the facts. You explained both sides. Vince McMahon was exposed. It was a clear explanation of what a boss can do to a wrestler. Geraldine Bridges. South Bend, Indiana. Kudos for the excellent coverage of the double cross. Vince McMahon's convenient recollection of the events on the Why Bret Why segment made my blood boil after reading a synopsis of what happened. It really seems that the advent of live weekly television has changed the entire face and inner workings of the industry, and not necessarily for the better. I think fans of today are exposed to far too much dirty laundry that will one day only ended up hurting wrestling's fan appeal. This fiasco is just the latest installment. Haven't done by format picks yet. But is there any question that Charles Skaggs is the most underrated wrestler? Has ever anyone with so much talent been buried so much? Paul Armentano. Silver Spring, Maryland. Excellent reporting in the November 17th Observer. I'm pretty sure almost everyone hates Vince McMahon over the incident. His interview on the November 17th Raw was a desperate attempt for everyone to understand his points. I almost thought he was going to end up saying, "Meet me in the parking lot at Kmart, Bret, if you've got the guts." Egomania aside, I feel like a pro supporter because I'm on Vince's side, even though this isn't a black and white issue. This was an issue of perception. Hart's fans wouldn't have liked him any less had he lost in Montreal, but losing a match to Shawn Michaels would have damaged his Canadian popularity. Hart just handing the belt over to Vince on Raw the next night would be damaging to the WWF. At that moment, the WWF would be perceived as a minor league ball camp for recruitment into the WCW. Even though this match was one of the most anticipated matches in years, Hart should have dropped the title in Detroit on November 8th. It would have made Survivor Series very anticlimactic, but it would have been a professional solution for both sides. An Eric Bischoff announcement on Nitro on November 10th would have been extremely damaging to the perception of the WWF with the casual fan. In the long run, the way it all went down, they both came out ahead. Hart became a bigger star than if he had pinned Michaels clean in the middle. The WWF belt was saved, although McMahon's name is mud. Rob Smith. Sarasota, Florida. Your coverage of the Survivor Series double cross was superb. Vince McMahon's unforgivable treatment of Bret Hart finishes me as a WWF fan. Hart served McMahon's organization faithfully and with distinction. For this, McMahon awarded him with a shameful betrayal. In one moment, McMahon revealed in front of millions that he would cut anyone's throat without blinking an eye. The man's talent for lying and deception would make many a politician weep with envy. He has the ruthlessness of a shark and a feeding frenzy and the conscience of a mafia don. Almost as despicable as McMahon's treachery was the conduct of those who assisted him. Not one of those spineless lackeys had either the guts or the moral fiber to alert Hart. What kind of work is worth losing all of your self-respect? Saddest of all was the conduct of Earl Hebner. The subsequent damage control interview between Jim Ross and St. Vincent, the Martyr, was a nauseating mixture of lies and hypocrisy. Hopefully WCW will counter by allowing Hart a chance to tell what really took place. Jan Wood. Mobile, Alabama. Wrestling Observer Newsletter. P.O. Box 1228, Campbell, California 95009-1228. December 8, 1997.